Get on board the Bernier bus train. Come get on board the Bernier bus train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Oh, get on board the Bernier bus train. Good morning, USA, and welcome to another episode of the Bernier Bus Show. We're looking at common dreams today. By trying to silence Sanders, the corporate media delegitimize themselves. The system was suffering a crisis of legitimacy. Nobody believed the official narrative anymore. Bernie Sanders' campaign has finally gone full throat with the obvious. The Democrat-aligned corporate media have thrown all journalistic principles to the wind to impose a Bernie blackout. How can someone who was the most popular politician in the nation in 2017 be made into a non-person? It's all intimately entwined with the multiple crises afflicting late-stage capitalism. In the absence of massive grassroots movements, corporate voices always drown out all the others. The Bernier Bus Show is trying to avoid this being drowned out. Capitalist ownership of the media allows the rich to frame their own worldview as the political center, thus relegating contending ideologies to the extremes of left or right. I've noticed a lot of the people that I follow are called far left commentators or far left pundits or something like that. It's a badge of distinction right now, I'd say, to be called far left. But it is what's going on here. They're trying to make people seem radical or extreme by calling them far left as opposed to sensible or the grown-ups in the room. In this sense, centrism is nothing more than the political position of the corporate owners, who construct media versions of reality that make corporate concocted policies seem the most logical, commonsensical, and socially responsible approach to the world's problems. As long as the rich can sustain broad public trust in the truth of their journalistic products, newspapers, electronic newscasts, books, and other media created by professional operatives directly answerable to rich owners, widespread revolt against the corporate order is unlikely. So they've got us right where they want us, as George Carlin would say. They got you by the balls. Capitalist ownership of the media allows the rich to frame their own worldview as the political center. That's the quote to highlight here. Most people, especially people in business, people who wear suits to work or pantsuits or nice clothing to work, they want people to like them. They want people to think of them as responsible adults. They want them to think of them as professional. And so because of that, they get the mainstream media view, not just in news shows, but in television shows, in situation comedies, and all sorts of media output in late night television shows. We've had a lot of people on those shows trying to talk sense into us, we far left people. And it's laughable if you think about it, how much pressure is applied to people just socially, just by making what happens in a professional or polite way on television seem like it's a great way to live your life, and then other people will like you and you'll get your own way, and everyone in your family will be safe, and it goes down a rabbit hole if you think about it. To insist on what's right is a way of living, as opposed to trying to figure out what everyone else thinks of as acceptable. This article goes on. The biggest historical resistance to the corporate rich white man's worldview has come from Black America, a besieged people with a unique social perspective. That goes along with what I was talking about in yesterday's show, and I was quoting the Tim Black show and an Instagram account on there, Charles Blow. We're talking about the youth, not the youth of all races, who know that capitalism, as they experience it, promises them nothing but endless austerity and war. Majorities of young Americans now embrace a version of socialism that is actually merely a less vicious capitalism, made kinder by a comprehensive system of social support similar to the social democratic order in Northwestern Europe. We've talked about that numerous times on the show. But late-stage capitalism is relentlessly eviscerating the European model and has no intention of allowing a replica to be erected in the United Corporate States of America, the global headquarters and armory of the lords of capital. That's a pretty good one. So if you want to be perceived as sensible, you'll go along here with the white rich people. U.S. oligarchs cannot find the language to tell their white subjects that the implicit imperial contract has been terminated. The megalomaniacal hustler capitalist Donald Trump jumped into the systemic late capitalist contradiction with racist, gleeful abandon in 2016. Speaking the plain language of white supremacy, Trump promised to put America first and avoid entanglements with the darker races of the world, the shithole people. By throwing red meat to his fellow racists, Trump massacred his dog-whistling opponents in the established Republican Party. At first, the Democratic half of the corporate duopoly was ecstatic. They thought Trump would appeal to only a minority of whites, allowing the Democrats to pick up tens of millions of moderate Republicans while scaring blacks and Latinos to vote Democrat in huge numbers. But the moderate Republicans were as mythical as the moderate U.S.-backed jihadists in Syria. Trump won solid majorities of whites, including white women, and took the presidency. So that all plays into the strategy of Bernie or bust. If you really want to solve this problem, the Donald Trump problem, the racist problem, and if you really want to solve the problems of the imperialist capitalism, if you want, especially if you're a minority or if you're a woman, if you would like the power shift to happen, it's only going to happen through demands placed on the oligarchy by organizing labor, weaponizing labor, so that the labor force can make demands. You're not going to get anything unless you can make demands. I was talking with Victor Tiffany, the original, but the founder of Bernie or Bust. He said this yesterday. I hear a lot of people saying, if they rig the primary again, it's going to be Bernie or bust. Now, the rigging includes the 50% rule and the large number of recruited candidates, the number of Democratic hopefuls in the race this time. They've been recruited by talent agencies. They've been recruited by the Clinton machine. I've shown that in other Bernie or Bust show episodes. And the Bernie blackout that this article is talking about. So if you want to understand the 50% rule, the threshold for Democratic Party delegate, I can't say that word today, delegate allocation. It's because it's followed by the word allocation. Pledged delegates are proportionately allocated to candidates getting 15% or more in a primary or caucus. In such a large field, this may complicate the nominating process. And that's on purpose. That's by design. Each state and territory has a certain number of pledged delegates that are allocated based on the result of the vote in its Democratic primary or caucus. For those states with more than one congressional district, the available delegates are split. Some are awarded based on the statewide vote, the at-large vote, while the remainder are based on the results in each individual congressional district. Pledged delegates are allocated in a proportional manner based on the vote shared received by each candidate. This is at both the statewide and congressional district level. There is a 15% minimum threshold to receive any delegates at all. Those not receiving the minimum are excluded, with the delegate pool divided proportionately among those candidates receiving 15% or more. So in 2016, it was kind of a moot point because there were only 2 candidates. But with a candidate of lots, that with a bigger field of candidates, there are ramifications here. The biggest potential implication is that no candidate arrives at the Milwaukee convention in July with enough delegates to win, and a brokered convention results. So if no candidate receives 15% of the vote, according to the rules, the Democratic Party rules, then 50% of the vote received by the frontrunner will be awarded to the other candidates. For example, if candidate A wins with 10% of the vote, delegates will be allocated proportionately to anyone that receives 5% or more. And that could happen with such a large field. But now here's the even trickier one. If only one candidate exceeds 15% of the vote, but just barely, then it's basically winner take all. It's not a big deal if that person is the clear front runner, but if one person gets 16% and then another one gets 14% and another one gets 12%, which is definitely a possibility here, and that happened repeatedly, while the next three candidates are just a few points behind. If that happened repeatedly, favoring the same candidate over the states as they play out in the primary process, the party could potentially end up with a nominee that lacks broad support. So the way things went with Hillary and the coin tosses and all that, you can see that we could end up with a big mess here. Now, if we want to talk about superdelegates, each state also has a certain number of automatic delegates. That's what they're trying to call them this time instead of superdelegates. Don't let that pass. Keep calling them superdelegates. The role for superdelegates will depend on how many pledged delegates the leader has after all primary and caucus events are completed. So if you go to the explanation of superdelegates, they will make up about 16% of Democratic Party delegates in 2020. These party insiders are part of each state's delegation, but are not committed to vote based on the outcome of the state's primary or caucus. Pete Buttigieg is a good example of that, who didn't vote for Bernie even though his state wanted Bernie. As a result, the party has made a significant change for 2020. Superdelegates will no longer vote on the first ballot at the convention unless there is no doubt about the outcome. But to win on the first ballot, the frontrunner must secure the majority of pledged delegates. So with 3979 total, a majority is 1990. All delegates become unpledged, and superdelegates will also vote if the convention is contested. You want a recipe for disaster. What you do there is you unhook all the delegates, and it's a free-for-all. Anything could happen after that. After you unhook the delegates, the pledged delegates, from their pledges, then the superdelegates weighed in, and there are a lot of them. 16% of the delegates are superdelegates, and based on what's going on, the DNC Clinton machine, the DNC funded Clinton, the Clinton machine funded DNC will wade in behind Elizabeth Warren. It's a foregone conclusion. The machine wants Elizabeth Warren. It's already crystal clear, as crystal ball. And so there you go. You've got a mess. So going back to the graphic here with Victor Tiffany, if people perceive it as rigged, and guaranteed it's rigged already, and that's where the 50% rule comes in, and the large number of recruited candidates, and we talked about Creative Artists Agency recruiting candidates, and Bernie blackout we talked about. So what we need to stress here is Bernie or bust remains a pledge. The more pledges, the more leverage. Leverage is counter-rigging. If you don't like it to be rigged, you need to use leverage to unrig it. It levels the playing field using extortion, yes, it's extortion, premised upon a demand which stems from a commitment to vote for a progressive on November 3rd, 2020. Bernie or Bust is a pledge to vote our progressive conscience. So you can take the Bernie or Bust pledge at bernieorbust2020.us. That's what we need to do. If we want to get on the Bernie or Bust train and hold the party accountable, hold the Democratic Party accountable, we need to take that Bernie or Bust pledge. I'll link to it in the information section below. And if you want to be the grown-ups in the room and you want to get around the media rigging and the party rigging and the Hollywood rigging and the corporate white people rigging, every other kind of rigging, then extortion is going to be needed in the form of Bernie or Bust. So get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Hope to see you tomorrow, and keep on burning. Get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Come get on board the Bernie or Bust train. Once you hear that clickety-clack, there ain't no time for turning back. Go get on board